I always believed in the idea of loyalty, in finding a partner who'd stick with you through thick and thin. I thought I had found that in Lisa. You know, we all have that vision, that dream of a future, one filled with love, laughter, and someone to share every moment with. I pictured growing old together, hand in hand, the kind of happiness you see in movies. I trusted her, maybe even more than I trusted myself. I had this unshakable faith that she was my one loyal constant in a world that's often unpredictable. There were these beliefs I carried with me. Bad people should face consequences, but surely the people we love can't be capable of hurting us that way, right? Lisa was the embodiment of everything I thought I wanted. A loving partner, a stable relationship, someone I could lean on. I trusted her with my heart, my fears, my dreams. In my mind, there was no way she'd ever betray me. That kind of thing happened to other people, not us. I had my fears though, we all do. The thought of her cheating on me was a nightmare I kept tucked away, deep in the corners of my mind. It wasn't something I dared to bring to the surface, but those fears, they lingered there, almost like shadows that followed me, even when I tried my best to ignore them. I'd tell myself, my Lisa would never do that. I'd watch her smile, hear her laugh, and my doubts would fade, replaced by that comforting belief that we were unbreakable. But despite my faith in her, there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where I'd catch myself wondering, was it all real? Was the love we had as strong as I believed it to be, or was I just naive? These questions gnawed at me sometimes, especially when I felt like I wasn't enough. I wasn't the wealthiest guy, didn't have the kind of status that would make heads turn, and there were times I felt like I'd failed, not just in life, but in being the man she deserved. Still, I held on to my dream, the dream that we'd make it through, that we'd be happy together till the end, no matter what. I wanted to believe in her so badly, in us, that I pushed all those doubts aside. After all, wasn't love supposed to be about trust? I desired nothing more than to be next to a woman who truly loved me, who would never let me down. Lisa was that woman. Or so I thought. It was just another Saturday afternoon when the neighbor, Tom, knocked on my door. I remember thinking it was odd. He wasn't the type to just pop by for a chat. I opened the door, and there he was, shuffling his feet, looking uneasy. I invited him in, but he declined, his eyes darting around like he was unsure of what to say or whether to say it at all. I could see something was weighing on him, but I never expected what came next. He started with, "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but..." That's never a good way to start a conversation. My gut tightened, and I could feel my heart rate pick up, an instinct telling me that whatever he was about to say, I wasn't going to like it. He hesitated, and in that pause, 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, but none of them prepared me for the words that came next. "Listen, I've seen Lisa with someone else. It's not just once either." He looked at me, his eyes filled with pity. That kind of pity that cuts deep, the kind that makes you feel small, exposed. I wanted to stop him, to tell him he must be mistaken, that it wasn't possible, that Lisa would never do that. My Lisa was loyal. My Lisa loved me. But all I could do was stand there, staring at him, feeling the floor beneath me start to give way. I managed to ask him what he meant, and he explained how he'd seen Lisa with some guy, out at a restaurant, laughing, holding hands, just too close to be friends. My hands started to shake. I wanted to believe that there was some explanation, that it was all some kind of misunderstanding. I even tried to convince myself that Tom had mixed her up with someone else, but deep down, I could feel it, something cracking inside me. Tom apologized for bringing it up, and I forced a smile, thanking him for letting me know. After he left, I closed the door and just stood there, my mind in a haze. I kept replaying his words over and over, hoping to find some flaw in what he said. But no matter how much I tried to twist his story, it made too much sense, and that's what scared me the most. I walked over to the window and stared outside, not really seeing anything. I wanted to believe in Lisa, in the love we had. But now, there was this shadow over everything. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, that seed of doubt had already taken root. The perfect image I had of us, of her, started to blur, and I could feel the cracks forming, slowly spreading through everything I believed in. After Tom left, I found myself pacing the living room, my thoughts looping around like a broken record. Lisa cheating? No, it just couldn't be true. Tom must have seen something out of context. Maybe it was a work colleague. Maybe it was just some old friend. My mind scrambled to find any rational explanation that would let me cling to the image of Lisa I had always believed in. I wanted to ask her about it immediately, demand an explanation, force her to tell me it wasn't true. But what if it was? What if everything Tom said was real? And she just looked me in the eyes and confirmed my worst fears. The idea of hearing those words come from her made my chest tighten, like I was being suffocated by the very air around me. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for my entire world to crumble. So I stayed quiet. I kept it inside, pushing down the thoughts whenever they tried to surface. I tried to act normal around Lisa, but it felt like there was a glass wall between us. I watched her more closely now, her phone calls, her excuses for being late. Every time she went out, I found myself questioning where she was going and who she was with. It was exhausting, living in this constant state of suspicion. I wanted so badly to be wrong, to have a reason to dismiss everything Tom had said. But then there were moments, like when she'd laugh at her phone, or seem distracted when we were together, that made my stomach turn. I hated myself for it, for doubting her, for not trusting the woman I loved, and yet I couldn't stop. The fear that she was betraying me had taken root, and I couldn't shake it. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was just being paranoid or if my whole life was actually unraveling. It was a war inside my head. One part of me wanted to confront her, to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The other part was desperate to keep things as they were, to live in the comfort of denial for just a little longer. I'd look at her, sleeping peacefully next to me, and my heart would ache. I loved her so much, and the idea of losing her, or worse, of finding out she had chosen someone else, was more than I could bear. I felt like I was standing on a cliff, teetering on the edge, terrified of what would happen if I took that final step. Every day, I battled with myself, trying to find the courage to face whatever was going on. I kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd wake up and everything would be fine. That Tom was wrong, that all my doubts were for nothing. But deep down, I knew I couldn't run from the truth forever. The cracks were there, growing wider each day, and sooner or later, I'd have to face whatever was on the other side. The more I thought about it, the more it started eating away at me. It wasn't just the idea of Lisa cheating that hurt. It was what it said about me. If it was true, then what did that mean about who I was? I couldn't help but feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't enough for her anymore. It's hard to describe how that realization seeps in. It's not a single moment, but a series of tiny cracks that make you question everything about yourself. I looked in the mirror and didn't like what I saw. The man staring back at me wasn't the kind of guy a woman would leave everything behind for. I was just ordinary. I didn't have the charm, the wealth, or the kind of confidence that could make a woman forget about everything else. The more I compared myself to whoever this other guy might be, the smaller I felt. I started wondering what he had that I didn't. Was he better looking? Was he more successful? Did he make her laugh in a way I couldn't anymore? I began dissecting every flaw, every shortcoming. My career wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be, and I wasn't making the kind of money I thought I'd be at this point in life. My body, well, let's just say I hadn't seen the inside of a gym in a long time. Every little thing that used to just be a part of who I was now felt like a reason for Lisa to look elsewhere. And it wasn't just her. Suddenly, it felt like everyone could see it. That I wasn't good enough. That I'd failed not only as a husband, but as a man. I remember one particular night, Lisa was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, laughing softly at something. I watched her from across the room, and it hit me. What if she was talking to him right now? What if she was sharing a joke, a moment of joy, with someone else while I was just there? The thought crushed me. I felt like I was standing in her shadow, invisible, not even worth her attention anymore. It's strange how quickly self-doubt can turn into self-loathing. I felt like I'd let her down, like I'd let myself down. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't enjoy the things I used to. Even simple conversations with friends felt hollow because all I could think about was how much I was lacking. I was ashamed of not being enough, ashamed that I was losing Lisa, and ashamed that I felt so powerless to stop it. I tried to compensate, doing more around the house, trying to make her favorite meals, or asking about her day, but every gesture felt empty, like I was just grasping at straws, desperately trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. And no matter how much effort I put in, there was always that nagging voice in the back of my head, whispering that it wouldn't make a difference, that I was already too late, and that whatever we had was already gone. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The doubts, the suspicions, it was all eating me alive. I knew I had to talk to Lisa. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. One evening, after dinner, I sat there at the table, watching her clear the dishes, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending. My voice felt stuck in my throat, but somehow I found the words. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, her smile fading as she saw the seriousness on my face. I could see the question in her eyes, the confusion. She sat down across from me, and I could feel my heart pounding. This was it, the moment everything could come crashing down. I took a deep breath and told her about Tom, about what he'd said. I told her how I'd been feeling, my fears, my doubts, the sleepless nights. As the words spilled out, I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger, sadness, and desperation. I was laying it all out there, exposing the rawest parts of myself, and I was terrified of what would come next. Lisa's face went pale. She didn't deny it right away, and that silence, that few seconds of hesitation, was like a knife twisting in my gut. I could see the emotions flash across her face. Shock, guilt, maybe even fear. She started to speak, her voice soft, telling me it wasn't what I thought, that it wasn't serious, that it was a mistake. But none of it mattered. Every word felt hollow, like it was meant to patch up something that had already been shattered beyond repair. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, to make her understand what she had done to me. But all I could do was sit there, numb. It felt like I was watching it all happen from outside my body, like this was someone else's life, falling apart. I heard her say she was sorry, over and over, but the words barely registered. The person sitting across from me didn't feel like the woman I'd loved for so many years. She was someone else, a stranger who had torn my heart out without a second thought. I asked her if she loved him, and she looked down, avoiding my eyes. That silence spoke louder than any words could have. It was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. All those moments we shared, all the promises we made, they felt like lies now. The future I'd imagined for us, the dreams I held so close, they all crumbled in that instant. She reached across the table, trying to hold my hand, tears streaming down her face. But I pulled away. I couldn't let her touch me. Not now. Not after everything. I stood up, feeling like the ground beneath me was gone, like I was floating in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I looked at her one last time, and all I could say was, why? She didn't have an answer, and maybe there wasn't one that would ever make sense to me. I walked away, leaving her there at the table, and I felt like I was leaving behind everything I'd believed in. The illusion of who Lisa was, of who we were together, was shattered. And there was no going back. After that night, everything felt like it was unraveling. It was like I was on a roller coaster that never stopped, a mix of anger, sadness, confusion, and moments where I just felt empty. 1 minute, I'd be furious, wanting to scream, to smash something, to make her understand just how much she'd hurt me. And then the next, I'd feel this crushing sadness, this weight on my chest that made it hard to even breathe. It was like a part of me had died, and all I could do was mourn it. I remember trying to go to work the next day, hoping the routine would distract me, that maybe I could just forget about it for a while. But everything felt pointless. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my computer, the words on the screen blurring together. My thoughts kept drifting back to her, to us, to everything we'd lost. I'd think about all those little moments we shared, laughing over coffee in the mornings, the way she'd look at me when I came home from work, the plans we made for the future. It all felt like a cruel joke now, like I'd been living in some fantasy that wasn't real. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, and it was like a void that swallowed me whole. I missed her. Even after everything, I missed her. I missed the way she'd curl up next to me, the way she'd make me feel like everything was going to be okay. And at the same time, I hated her for what she'd done, for breaking us, for making me feel so small and worthless. It was a constant tug of war inside me, loving her, hating her, missing her, wanting her gone. It was exhausting. I'd get up in the middle of the night, pacing the living room, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted answers, wanted to understand why she did it. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Was I not enough? The questions kept swirling in my mind, and there were no answers, just this gnawing pain that wouldn't go away. It was like I was drowning in my own thoughts, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find my way to the surface. There were moments when I thought about calling her, about asking her to come back, to fix things. But then I'd remember the look in her eyes when she hesitated to answer if she loved him, and it would tear me apart all over again. How could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her without seeing the betrayal? The hurt was too deep, and I knew that even if she came back, it would never be the same. I felt so lost, like I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, had been ripped away. I was angry at her, angry at myself for not seeing it, for not being enough. I was angry at the world for letting this happen. And then there were moments when the anger would fade, and all that was left was this hollow emptiness, this aching loneliness that made me feel like I was completely alone in the world. The roller coaster never seemed to end. Each day was a new struggle, a new wave of emotions that hit me out of nowhere. Some days I'd feel a little stronger, like maybe I could get through this. And then the next day, I'd feel like I was back at square one, broken and lost all over again. It was a cycle that kept repeating, and I didn't know how to break free from it. All I knew was that I had to keep going, even if it felt impossible. There came a point when I had to face the question I'd been avoiding. Should I stay or should I leave? It wasn't an easy decision to even think about. The idea of walking away from Lisa, from everything we'd built together, felt like giving up on my entire life. But the thought of staying, of pretending like things could ever be the same, made my stomach turn. It was like I was standing at a fork in the road, and neither path looked any less painful. I sat in the living room one night, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. There we were, smiling, happy, full of hope for the future. I remember that day so clearly, the promises we made to each other, the way I thought we'd always be able to overcome anything as long as we had each other. But now, looking at that picture, it felt like a stranger staring back at me. Who was that man? So full of faith in love, so certain that everything would work out. The memories we shared made the decision so much harder. I couldn't just erase all those years together, all the laughter, the adventures, the quiet moments that meant everything. I thought about all the little things, how she knew exactly how I liked my coffee, how we'd stay up late watching bad movies, how we dreamed about the life we'd build together. Was I really ready to throw all of that away? But then, I'd remember her silence when I asked if she loved him, the look on her face when she couldn't answer. That moment played over and over in my mind, and it hurt every single time. How could I stay with someone who had betrayed me like that, who had chosen someone else while I was still believing in us? Could I ever really forgive her? Or would that doubt, that anger, always be there between us? I went back and forth, day after day, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to stay, to find a way to fix things, to believe that maybe we could still have a future together. But the other part of me knew that I'd never be able to trust her again. I'd always wonder where she was, who she was with, if she was lying to me. It would be a life filled with suspicion and fear, and I didn't know if I could live like that. I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of life I wanted to live. I didn't want to be someone who stayed out of fear, out of desperation, to hold on to something that was already gone. I wanted to be someone who valued himself enough to walk away from a situation that was only causing pain. I deserved better than to be someone's second choice, someone to fall back on when things didn't work out elsewhere. The hardest part was realizing that love wasn't always enough. I loved Lisa, even after everything, but that love wasn't going to fix what was broken. It wasn't going to erase the betrayal or the pain. I had to accept that sometimes, no matter how much you want it to work, the best thing you can do is let go. It wasn't about punishing her or even about getting revenge. It was about choosing myself, about finding a way to move forward without the weight of everything that had happened dragging me down. And so, I made the decision. I decided that I couldn't stay, that I had to leave. It wasn't easy. It felt like tearing a part of myself away. But deep down, I knew it was the only way I could ever start to heal. I had to let go of the past, of the dreams I'd held onto for so long, and find a way to build something new for myself. It was terrifying, but it was also the first time in a long time that I felt like I could finally breathe. After deciding I had to leave, I knew I couldn't go through it alone. The weight of everything was just too much, and I needed someone, anyone, to help me find my way through the darkness. Reaching out wasn't easy. I'd always been the type to keep my struggles to myself, especially when it came to something this painful. It felt like admitting that I'd failed, that I wasn't strong enough to keep my marriage together. But I also knew that trying to carry this all by myself was tearing me apart. I called my best friend, Mark. We hadn't talked in a while, not really, just the usual small talk, catching up now and then. But when I heard his voice on the other end, something broke inside me. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I told him everything, my voice cracking, and he just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't tell me what I should have done differently. He just let me pour it all out, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't drowning. Mark came over that night, and we sat in the living room, talking until the early hours of the morning. He told me stories about the good times we had before Lisa, reminding me of who I was before all of this. He reminded me that I was more than just someone who had been cheated on, that I was still me, still worth something, even if my marriage had fallen apart. It was like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge when I felt like I had nothing left. I also reached out to my sister. We'd always been close, but I hadn't told her about what was happening with Lisa until now. She was furious, angry at Lisa for hurting me, angry at the situation. But more than anything, she was there for me. She let me come over whenever I needed to get away, made me dinner, and just sat with me while I tried to make sense of everything. She reminded me that I still had people who loved me, people who would never betray me or walk away. It was strange opening up like that, letting people see me at my lowest, my most vulnerable. I'd always been the one to keep it together, the one people could rely on. And now, here I was, leaning on them. But what I realized was that it didn't make me weak. It didn't mean I had failed. It meant I was human. It meant I was willing to let people in, to let them help me pick up the pieces. And slowly, with their support, I started to feel like maybe I could make it through this. The conversations, the small gestures, like Mark showing up with my favorite beer or my sister texting me just to check in, they all added up. They were reminders that I wasn't alone, that even though I had lost Lisa, I hadn't lost everything. There were still people who cared about me, who wanted to see me happy, and their support gave me the strength to take things one day at a time, to face the uncertainty of what was coming next. There were still nights when I felt the pain, when the loneliness felt unbearable, but it wasn't as overwhelming as before. When I felt myself slipping, I'd call Mark or go over to my sister's, and just being around people who cared about me made all the difference. I started to see that my life wasn't over. It was different, yes, and it was still filled with pain, but it wasn't over. I had people who were ready to help me rebuild, and that gave me hope. As the days passed, I found myself trying to make sense of it all. The anger, the sadness, it was all still there, but underneath it was this desperate need to understand why. Why had Lisa done it? Was it something I did or didn't do? I went over everything in my mind, trying to piece together how we had ended up here. I knew it wouldn't change what had happened, but maybe if I could understand, I could finally find a way to move on. Part of me wanted to hate her. I wanted to hold on to that anger, to use it as a shield against the pain. She had betrayed me, broken every promise we'd made to each other, and there was a part of me that felt she deserved whatever consequences came her way. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. There was a sense of justice in that, of her facing the fallout of her actions, of having to deal with the damage she'd caused. But then there was another part of me, one that couldn't completely let go of the love I'd had for her. I tried to put myself in her shoes, to understand what had led her to make those choices. Had she been unhappy? Had I missed the signs? Was there something more I could have done? Something that could have kept her from straying? It was hard to accept, but I knew our marriage hadn't been perfect. There were times when I'd been distant, when I'd been so focused on work or my own struggles that maybe I hadn't been there for her the way I should have. It didn't excuse what she'd done, nothing could, but it made me realize that there were two sides to every story. She was human, just like me, and maybe she'd been dealing with her own fears and insecurities. Maybe she hadn't known how to talk to me about what she was feeling. It didn't make the betrayal hurt any less, but it made it harder to simply label her as the villain. She was someone I had loved deeply, someone who had once made me incredibly happy. And part of me still wanted to hold on to that version of her, even if I knew it was gone. The struggle between empathy and the desire for justice was exhausting. One moment, I'd be filled with compassion, thinking about how maybe she hadn't meant to hurt me, that maybe she was struggling too. And then the next, I'd be overwhelmed with anger, wanting her to feel the pain she had caused me, wanting her to understand just how deeply she had cut me. It was like I was being pulled in two different directions, and I didn't know which one was right. I think deep down, I knew that holding on to the anger would only end up hurting me more. It would keep me trapped, tied to the past, unable to move forward. But letting go, finding empathy, felt like letting her off the hook, like saying what she did was okay, and it wasn't. I had to find a balance between the two, a way to acknowledge the hurt while also recognizing that she was a flawed human being, just like I was. I remember sitting one afternoon staring out the window and realizing that maybe I didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe I didn't need to understand every reason behind her actions or to decide whether she deserved my empathy or my anger. Maybe it was enough to accept that what happened, happened, and that it was now up to me to decide how I wanted to move forward. It was about finding peace, not for her, but for myself, letting go of the need to punish her and instead focusing on what I needed to heal. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something that happened overnight. There were still moments when the anger would rise up, or when I'd feel the pull of empathy and wonder if I'd done enough to keep us together. But slowly, I began to realize that the only way to truly move on was to let go of both extremes, to let go of the desire for justice, and to let go of the need to understand every detail. It was about accepting what was and choosing to focus on what could be. My future, my happiness, my own journey forward. After everything, I knew I had to start putting myself back together. I couldn't keep living in that cycle of pain and doubt. I needed to heal. At first, I didn't know where to begin. My self-worth had taken such a massive hit that even looking at myself in the mirror felt like a challenge. Who was I without Lisa, without the life we had built? It felt like I was standing in the wreckage of something I used to be, unsure of where to even start picking up the pieces. I decided to take small steps, tiny actions that reminded me I was still capable of more than just feeling broken. I started going for walks in the evenings, just to clear my mind. It wasn't much, but the fresh air, the movement, it helped. It gave me space to breathe, to think without the weight of everything pressing down on me. I'd walk through the neighborhood, listening to music, and for those moments, it felt like the world was a little less heavy. I also decided to pick up an old hobby I had long forgotten: playing guitar. It was something I used to love, something that brought me joy before everything got so complicated. Dusting off the guitar, I sat down one night and just started playing. At first, it felt awkward, my fingers clumsy on the strings, but after a while, I found the rhythm again, and I lost myself in the music. It was like reconnecting with a part of myself I had lost along the way, a part that had nothing to do with Lisa or what had happened. It was just me. I also started going to the gym. I wasn't trying to transform myself overnight or prove anything to anyone. I just needed something to focus on, something that made me feel like I was taking care of myself. The physical exertion, the sweat, the soreness, it was all a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. With each workout, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. It wasn't about impressing anyone or trying to win Lisa back. It was about proving to myself that I was worth the effort. As I worked on myself, I also began to realize the importance of my own voice. I had spent so long doubting myself, questioning if I was good enough, that I had forgotten who I truly was. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts, my fears, my hopes for the future. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes the words came out messy and confused, but it felt good to get them out. To see my pain on the page, to acknowledge it, and then to let it go. There were still bad days, days when I felt like I was back at square one, when the pain would wash over me all over again. But there were also good days, days when I felt lighter, when I could see a glimpse of the person I wanted to become. I knew I had a long way to go, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was on the right path. I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to live again. And it was in those small moments, when I was strumming my guitar, or feeling the burn of a workout, or simply taking in the sunset during a walk, that I began to rediscover my self-worth. I realized that I was more than the betrayal, more than the pain Lisa had caused. I was still me, and I was worth fighting for. The journey wasn't over, but I had taken the first steps, and that was enough for now. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, but by how I chose to move forward. And slowly, I was choosing to heal. I was choosing to find myself again, to remember that I was capable of love, of joy, of being enough just as I was. And that realization, small as it might have seemed, was the most powerful part of my healing journey. The healing process wasn't linear. Just when I thought I was making progress, a setback would hit me, and it would feel like I was right back where I started. It was frustrating to say the least. I'd have a few good days in a row, days when I felt lighter, when I thought I might actually be okay, and then, without warning, the doubts and pain would come rushing back, knocking the wind out of me. It could be the smallest thing that triggered it. Sometimes it was seeing an old photo of Lisa on my phone, one I had forgotten to delete. The smile on her face, the way she looked at me, it was like a punch to the gut. In that moment, all the progress I had made seemed to vanish, and all I could feel was the ache of what I had lost. I'd start to wonder if I had made the right choice by leaving. What if I'd tried harder? What if I had fought for us just a little longer? Would we still be together, working things out? Other times, it would be a song that played on the radio, one that reminded me of our time together. The memories would come flooding back, and for a moment, I'd be back in those happier days, driving together, singing along, not a care in the world. But then reality would hit, and I'd remember that those days were gone, that the person I had loved had betrayed me. It was like being pulled between two worlds, one filled with love and hope, and the other with pain and betrayal. I started to doubt myself again. Was I really strong enough to move on? Was I even capable of finding happiness without her? The old fears resurfaced, fears that I wasn't good enough, that maybe I would never find someone who would truly love me. I'd look around at the life I was trying to rebuild, and some days it just felt empty. The silence in the house was deafening, a constant reminder that I was alone. And no matter how much I tried to fill that silence, with music, with hobbies, with anything, I couldn't escape the feeling of loneliness. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and all I could think about was Lisa. Not just the betrayal, but the good times too. I missed her, even though I knew she had hurt me. I missed the way she would laugh, the way she would comfort me when I was down, the way she made me feel like I was part of something bigger. And that was the hardest part, missing someone who had caused me so much pain. It made me question everything, my decision to leave, my ability to move forward, even my worth. I remember one night, after a particularly tough day, I just broke down. The weight of everything felt unbearable, and all I could do was sit there, crying, feeling completely defeated. I thought I had made progress, thought I was getting better, but in that moment, it felt like all of it had been an illusion. The doubts, the fears, the loneliness, they were all still there, and I didn't know if I'd ever truly escape them. But then, in those moments of setback, I started to realize something. It was okay to feel this way. It was okay to have bad days, to feel the pain, to miss what I had lost. Healing wasn't supposed to be perfect. It wasn't supposed to be a straight line, from broken to whole. There were going to be setbacks. There were going to be moments when I felt like I was falling apart all over again. And that was part of the process. It didn't mean I wasn't healing. It didn't mean I wasn't strong. It just meant that I was human. So I let myself feel it. I let myself cry, let myself doubt, let myself hurt. And then, when the storm passed, I got back up and kept going. The setbacks were painful, but they were also a reminder that I was still trying, still fighting. They were proof that I hadn't given up, that even in the face of all the pain, I was still here, still moving forward. And that, I realized, was enough. There was a day, an ordinary day really, when something just clicked for me. I was sitting in the park, watching people walk by, families, couples, people jogging, and I realized that I wasn't broken anymore, not in the way I had been. I'd spent so much time feeling like I was defined by what happened with Lisa, by the betrayal, by the pain. But in that moment, I felt something different. It was like a quiet strength, a small flicker of independence that I hadn't noticed before. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was okay being alone. It wasn't that I didn't still feel the loss, or that I didn't wish things had turned out differently. It was that I could finally sit there, by myself, without feeling the weight of it all crushing me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to feel alive again. And that realization, as simple as it might have seemed, was a turning point. I started making decisions for myself, not based on what I thought would make Lisa happy, or what would make me feel like I was worth something to someone else. I started doing things just because I wanted to. I signed up for a photography class. I'd always been interested in it, but I'd never found the time before. It was something just for me, something that made me feel creative, that let me see the world in a new way. I found myself getting lost in it, and for those hours, it was like everything else faded away. I also started focusing more on my career. For so long, I'd felt like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't have the success or the status that would make someone like Lisa stay. But now, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about finding pride in myself, in what I was capable of. I took on new projects, pushed myself to take risks I'd been too scared to take before. And with each success, each small victory, I could feel my confidence growing. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it for me. Even simple things, like cooking a nice meal for myself or spending a quiet evening with a book, started to feel meaningful. They weren't just ways to pass the time or distract myself from the loneliness. They were moments where I felt content, where I felt at peace. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Lisa, by the love we'd lost or the pain she had caused me. I was starting to redefine myself, to see myself as someone who was capable of standing on his own, someone who didn't need validation from anyone else to feel whole. I remember one day, I ran into an old friend who I hadn't seen since everything happened. They asked me how I was doing, and for the first time, I found myself genuinely smiling. I told them I was doing well, and I meant it. It wasn't just something I said to avoid the pity or to convince myself I was okay. It was real. I was doing well. I had found my own rhythm, my own strength, and I was proud of that. This turning point wasn't about forgetting Lisa or pretending like the past hadn't happened. It was about accepting it, letting it be a part of my story, but not letting it define me anymore. I was more than the man who had been cheated on. I was more than the heartbreak and the doubts. I was finding myself again, rediscovering who I was before the pain and who I could be now. And that strength, that sense of independence, was something no one could take away from me. It wasn't about being over everything that had happened. It was about choosing to live my life for me, on my own terms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, that was enough. It happened when I least expected it. I was at a coffee shop, one of those places I'd found myself frequenting since I started taking my walks. I liked the atmosphere, the warm light, the quiet hum of conversation, the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. I'd gone there to clear my mind, to take a break from work, and just enjoy a moment to myself. I wasn't looking for anything or anyone. I was simply trying to enjoy my own company. I was standing at the counter, waiting for my order, when I heard a voice beside me. "Do you mind if I borrow the sugar?" I turned, and there she was. Her smile was genuine, kind, the kind that reaches the eyes. I handed her the sugar, and for some reason, maybe it was the way she looked at me, like I was actually there, not just another stranger in line, I decided to say something, instead of just nodding and turning away. We started talking. It was small talk at first, about the coffee, about the weather, but there was something different about the way she spoke, like she was truly interested in the conversation. She wasn't rushing it, and neither was I. Her name was Emily, and before I knew it, we were sitting at a table together, still talking. It wasn't forced, it wasn't awkward, it was just easy. I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing at something she said. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that, without it being forced, without it feeling like I was trying to prove to myself that I was okay. It was real, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of hope. I could see myself connecting with someone again, in a way I thought I'd lost forever. We talked for over an hour about everything and nothing, our jobs, places we'd traveled, the little things we loved about life. She was so open, so genuine, and it made me want to be open too. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't talk about Lisa or the pain I'd been through, but I found myself sharing things about myself that I hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. She made it easy, made me feel like I was worth listening to. When it was time for her to go, she hesitated for a moment, then smiled and asked if I'd like to meet up again sometime. I almost couldn't believe it. I'd spent so long doubting if I'd ever be able to let someone new in, if anyone would ever see me as more than the broken pieces I felt I had become. But there she was, looking at me like I was someone worth knowing, someone she wanted to see again. I said yes. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment. It was simple, just a, yeah, I'd like that. But it felt like a step forward, a step toward something new. I didn't know where it would lead, and I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious, but it was enough. It was enough to know that I could still feel that connection, that maybe, just maybe, I could open my heart again, even if it was just a little bit. As I walked home that day, I felt a sense of lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't expecting to fall in love right away or to have everything magically fixed by meeting someone new, but I realized that my heart wasn't closed off anymore. There was space there for something new, for new memories, for new laughter, and that made all the difference. Meeting Emily didn't erase the past. It didn't make everything I'd been through vanish, but it gave me hope that maybe someday I could find love again. And for now, that was enough. Meeting Emily was one thing, but letting myself trust again, that was a whole different challenge. After everything that had happened, trust felt fragile, like a delicate thread I was too scared to hold on to. But there was something about her, something about the way she listened, the way she cared, that made me want to try. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the fear of being hurt again almost made me pull back. But somehow, she made it feel worth the risk. The first time I told her about Lisa, it was late in the evening. We had been seeing each other for a few weeks, and I knew it was time to be honest. We were sitting on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and I just started talking. I told her about the betrayal, about the pain, about the months of feeling like I wasn't good enough. My voice shook, and I could feel the old emotions stirring, the rawness of it all still very much alive. But she didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything. She just listened, her eyes filled with understanding, her hand resting gently on mine. I remember looking at her, expecting pity or discomfort, but all I saw was compassion. She didn't judge me for my fears, for my doubts. She didn't push me to move faster or tell me that it was time to get over it. She simply told me that she was there, that she understood why I was scared, and that she was willing to be patient with me. It was the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, it was possible to open up again without getting hurt. Slowly, I began to trust her, one small step at a time. I'd let her in a little more each day, telling her about my hopes, my fears, the things that made me feel vulnerable. And she did the same. She shared her own stories, her own moments of heartbreak and loss, and I realized that I wasn't alone in my fears. We were both imperfect, both carrying our own wounds, but we were willing to take a chance on each other. There were times when the fear still crept in, moments when she'd be late to meet me, or when she'd get a call and step away, and I'd feel that familiar tightening in my chest, the fear that history was repeating itself, that I was about to be hurt all over again. But each time, I reminded myself that she wasn't Lisa. She wasn't the person who had betrayed me. She was someone new, someone who had shown me nothing but kindness and care. And slowly, I learned to trust in that. We took things slow. I didn't rush into anything, and neither did she. We spent time getting to know each other, not just the good parts, but the messy parts too. She saw me at my best and at my worst, and she never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. With every passing day, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to come down. It wasn't all at once, and it wasn't without hesitation, but I could feel it happening. There was one moment, not too long after we'd started seeing each other, when I knew I was truly starting to trust her. We were sitting at my place, just talking about our day, and I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. I wasn't looking for signs of betrayal or wondering if she was hiding something. I was just there, with her, and it felt safe. It felt real. Rebuilding trust wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward anyway. It was about letting myself be vulnerable again, knowing that there were no guarantees, but also knowing that I was strong enough to handle whatever came my way. With Emily, I found that trust wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was something that grew slowly, nurtured by honesty, by patience, and by love. I knew there would still be moments of doubt, moments when the scars of the past would ache. But I also knew that I had found someone who was willing to walk that path with me, who understood that trust wasn't about being perfect, but about being willing to show up day after day, despite the fear. And with every step we took together, I felt myself healing a little more, learning that it was okay to let someone in, to trust, to love again. One day, as I was sitting with Emily on her porch, watching the sunset, it hit me. I looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something that was more than just hope. It was happiness. It was simple, quiet, and real. It wasn't the kind of happiness that sweeps you off your feet or makes grand promises. It was steady, something I could trust, something that made me feel safe. I realized in that moment that I had found love again. It hadn't happened all at once. It was like a seed that had been planted when I first met her, growing little by little each day until finally it had taken root. I loved the way she made me feel seen, the way she listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart. I loved the way she'd laugh at my terrible jokes, the way she'd get excited about the smallest things, like a good cup of coffee or a beautiful day. It was all these little things that made me realize that what we had was special, that it was worth holding on to. I also realized that this love was different from what I had with Lisa. With Lisa, I had been so focused on the idea of what we were supposed to be, on the future I thought we were building, that I had missed the cracks that were forming beneath the surface. With Emily, there were no illusions, no expectations of perfection. It was just us, two people who had been hurt, who had found each other, and who were willing to take things one day at a time. It was honest, and that made all the difference. I started to notice how, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of the past with me everywhere I went. The pain, the betrayal, the doubts, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were part of my story, yes, but they weren't the only part. Emily had helped me see that I was more than my scars, that I was still capable of love, of joy, of being happy. She had shown me that the past didn't have to dictate my future. One evening, as we sat together, she looked at me and said, "I'm glad you're here." It was such a simple thing to say, but it meant everything to me. I realized I was glad too, glad that I hadn't let the heartbreak destroy me, that I hadn't closed myself off to the possibility of love. I had taken a chance, despite all the fears, and it had led me here to this moment of peace and contentment. We talked about the future, but it wasn't with the urgency or pressure that I had felt before. It was about the simple things, weekend trips we wanted to take, books we wanted to read together, places we wanted to explore. It wasn't about building some perfect life or meeting some ideal expectation. It was just about being together, about sharing the little moments that made life beautiful. And that, to me, was everything. I knew that there would still be challenges, that love wasn't a guarantee of forever, but I also knew that I was stronger now, that I had faced my worst fears and come out the other side. I had learned to trust again, to open my heart, and that was something no one could take away from me. With Emily, I had found someone who loved me for who I was, flaws and all, and I loved her just as much. Looking back, I realized that the journey I had taken, the heartbreak, the pain, the doubts, had all led me here. It had taught me what love truly was. It wasn't about grand gestures or promises that could never be broken. It was about showing up day after day, even when it was hard. It was about choosing each other, not out of fear or need, but out of genuine care and connection. In that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and I held Emily's hand, I felt it, the kind of happiness I had dreamed of for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was more than enough. I had discovered love again, and for the first time, I knew I could truly be happy. The loop had closed, and this time, it was with a sense of hope and peace that I hadn't felt in years. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that has happened, I can't help but feel a sense of amazement at how far I've come. The person I was when this all began, angry, hurt, drowning in betrayal, feels like a distant version of myself. I'm still that person in a way, but I've also grown into someone new. I've learned that the hardest moments in our lives have a way of shaping us, of showing us what we're truly capable of. When Lisa betrayed me, it felt like my entire world had fallen apart. I lost my sense of self, my confidence, my belief in love. I felt like I was nothing, like I had failed in the most profound way possible. But what I see now is that sometimes losing something is what it takes to find yourself again. I had to go through the darkness, the heartbreak, to learn who I was at my core, and to learn that I was stronger than I ever realized. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when I thought I'd never be able to put myself back together. The doubts, the setbacks, the nights when I felt completely alone, they all felt insurmountable at times. But in those moments, I found my strength. I found that even when everything seemed broken, there was still a part of me that was willing to fight, to keep moving forward. I've learned that love is not about perfection. It's not about holding on to a dream that no longer exists or trying to be something you're not. Love is about honesty, about showing up with all your flaws, all your fears, and still choosing to be there, day after day. It's about accepting that people make mistakes, that sometimes things fall apart, and that it's okay to let go. It's okay to choose yourself, to walk away from what no longer serves you, and to trust that there is something better waiting on the other side. Meeting Emily wasn't some grand, magical moment that suddenly made everything better. It was a series of small moments, of kindness, of laughter, of trust that slowly brought me back to life. She showed me that I could be loved for who I was, that I didn't need to be perfect to be worthy. She helped me see that my value wasn't defined by my past, by the pain I had experienced, but by who I chose to be every day moving forward. Now, as I look toward the future, I no longer feel the weight of what happened with Lisa. It's still a part of my story, and it always will be, but it doesn't define me. I am defined by how I chose to rise, by the love I found within myself, by the courage it took to open my heart again. I've learned that happiness is not something you find in another person. It's something you create within yourself. And when you find someone who adds to that happiness, who supports and loves you without conditions, that's when you truly find what love is meant to be. I'm grateful for the journey, as painful as it was. It taught me to be vulnerable, to trust again, to see the beauty in the smallest moments. It taught me that I am capable of more than I ever imagined. And it taught me that love is not about never being hurt. It's about having the strength to heal, to forgive, and to try again. So here I am, ready for whatever comes next. I don't know what the future holds, and that's okay. I know that I have the strength to face whatever comes, that I am surrounded by people who love me, and that I am capable of love, of happiness, and of a life filled with meaning. And as I hold Emily's hand and look at the road ahead, I know that I am finally where I am meant to be, at peace, with a heart that has healed, ready to embrace whatever comes next.